Fort. Redstone burned under an unforgiving sun. 282 soldiers stood in perfect formation, their uniforms crisp despite the oppressive heat. Pacing the line like a gathering storm was Colonel Victor Harland, a man whose presence alone could make the air crackle with tension. And at the very far end of that line, standing ramrod straight, was Lieutenant Mara Vance, only woman in the entire unit. Her eyes were fixed forward, betraying none of the turmoil she felt. This is the story of the day she stood her ground and changed everything. Mara Vance wasn't just another soldier. Her journey to this sun-scorched parade ground was a battle in itself. From the moment she entered the academy, she faced a relentless tide of sexism, doubt, and whispered rumors. Every promotion, every commendation, was met with skepticism. She had to be twice as good, twice as sharp, just to be considered equal. She earned her place through sheer grit, talent, and an unbreakable will. But for Colonel Harland, Mara wasn't a symbol of progress. She was a threat. He saw in her a type of strength he couldn't intimidate, a resilience he couldn't break. Her very presence in his battalion was a daily challenge to his old-world view of power and authority. He saw her competence not as an asset to his unit, but as a personal insult to his command. And he was determined to put her in her place, one way or another. The pressure had been building for months, a silent war waged in stolen glances and condescending remarks. Everyone felt it, but no one dared to speak. The fort was a powder keg, and Harland was holding the match. The tension finally boiled over a week before the incident, inside the sterile, windowless briefing room. The atmosphere was thick with the smell of stale coffee and anxiety. Mara stood at the front, presenting a new strategic plan for an upcoming operation. Her presentation was flawless, meticulously researched, logically sound, and tactically brilliant. She laid out every contingency, every variable, with a confidence that filled the room. One by one, the other officers nodded in approval. They saw the value in her plan, the genius in its simplicity. All except one. Colonel Harland sat at the head of the table, his arms crossed, his face a mask of contempt. When Mara finished, he didn't ask questions. He attacked. He publicly belittled her, twisting her words, poking holes in imaginary flaws. A bit ambitious for a lieutenant, don't you think? He sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. He wasn't critiquing the strategy. He was making it personal. He wanted to humiliate her, to shatter her confidence in front of her peers. But Mara simply stood there, her expression unreadable. She didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't give him the reaction he craved. And her unshakable composure only fueled his fury. That day, he left the briefing room angrier than he had entered. He had failed to break her, and for a man like Harland, that was a declaration of war. And so we returned to that scorching afternoon on the parade field. The sun beat down without mercy. Harland, still seething from the briefing room encounter a week prior, finally saw his chance. He broke from his inspection and marched directly toward Mara, his boots crunching on the gravel, each step a hammer blow of authority. He stopped inches from her face, his shadow casting a dark pall over her. You were late to formation this morning, Lieutenant, he accused, his voice low and menacing. The charge was false. Mara had been the first one on the field, as always. But this wasn't about tardiness, it was about power. No, sir, she replied, her voice steady and clear, her eyes locked on a point just over his shoulder. Her refusal to cower, her quiet defiance, was the spark that lit the fuse. In that moment, something inside Colonel Harland snapped. The last vestiges of his control crumbled to dust. With a guttural roar of pure rage, he raised his hand to strike her. The entire battalion held its breath. Time seemed to slow as his palm swung towards her face. A public, brutal act of dominance. But before his hand could make contact, Mara acted. It wasn't a panicked reaction. It was pure, instinctual training. In a fluid, lightning-fast motion, she moved. A perfect Aikido technique. A subtle shift of weight, a twist of her body, a precise lock on his wrist and elbow. There was a sickening, bone-cracking pop that echoed across the silent field. Colonel Victor Harland, the man who ruled by fear, crumpled to his knees, his face a contorted mask of shock and agony. A collective gasp rippled through the ranks. followed by an absolute deafening silence. Mara Vance stood over him, not with triumph, but with cold, resolute purpose. Then, she spoke, her voice cutting through the stillness for all 282 soldiers to hear. Never. Raise your hand. To a soldier under your command, the aftermath was immediate and chaotic. 2 medics rushed to the fallen colonel, while Mara was escorted away by the military police. She was taken not to the brig, but to an empty office to await questioning. The door swung open minutes later, and Harlan stormed in, his right arm now in a makeshift sling, his face purple with rage. "You broke my arm," he spat, the words dripping with venom. "You'll be court-martialed for this, assaulting a superior officer." He paced the small room like a caged animal, his fury radiating in waves. Mara remained seated, her hands resting calmly on her lap. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked him in the eye and stated the facts. "You attacked me in front of the entire battalion," she said, her tone level and unwavering. "I defended myself. That's the truth." Her calm, factual response only infuriated him more. He opened his mouth to unleash another tirade, but the words died in his throat as the office door opened again. Standing in the doorway was Colonel Reeves, the base commander, a man known for his stern but fair leadership. Reeves's eyes were cold, and his expression was grim. He looked from Harlan's enraged face to Mara's stoic calm. "I saw everything," Reeves said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of finality. "I was on the observation deck." Harlan's face went white. The color drained from him as the reality of his situation crashed down. There were no lies he could tell, no version of the story he could spin. He had been seen. His fate, in that single moment, was sealed. The judgment came swiftly. At 8 o'clock the next morning, the entire battalion was assembled once again, on the same parade ground where the incident had occurred. The mood was electric with anticipation and uncertainty. Colonel Reeves stepped before them, his presence commanding immediate silence. He didn't waste words. He announced that a full investigation had been launched into the events of the previous day. He confirmed that multiple witnesses, including himself, had seen Colonel Harlan attempt to strike a subordinate. "Effective immediately," Reeves declared, his voice ringing with authority. "Colonel Harlan has been relieved of his command pending the results of a full formal inquiry." A quiet murmur swept through the formation, a sound not of disrespect, but of profound relief. It was the sound of a long-held tension finally breaking. The soldiers stood a little taller. For the first time in a long time, the air on Fort Redstone didn't feel heavy with fear. The reign of Colonel Victor Harlan was over, but that wasn't the only news Colonel Reeves had to deliver that morning. There was still the question of leadership, of who would fill the sudden vacuum of power. With Harlan gone, the battalion stood in a state of limbo. Colonel Reeves let the silence hang in the air for a moment before he continued. He scanned the faces of the soldiers before him, his gaze finally resting on the far end of the formation, where Lieutenant Vance stood. "A unit cannot function without a leader," Reeves stated. "It needs a commander who leads not through fear, but through integrity. Someone who has proven they understand the weight of their responsibility and the duty of care they owe to their soldiers." He paused, letting his words sink in. Then, he made the announcement that would change the course of Fort Redstone forever. "As of today," he projected, his voice firm, "Lieutenant Mara Vance is hereby appointed acting commander of this battalion." For a heartbeat, there was stunned silence. And then, it began. A single soldier started clapping. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire formation erupted in a wave of thunderous applause. It wasn't just polite or dutiful, it was genuine, heartfelt approval. The soldiers weren't just clapping for Mara, they were clapping for the end of tyranny and the dawn of a new era. An era led not by force, but by courage. An era of integrity. The formal inquiry concluded as expected, faced with overwhelming evidence and the testimony of dozens of soldiers who finally felt safe enough to speak. Victor Harlan was found guilty of assault, abuse of power, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. He was quietly and dishonorably discharged from the military, his long and once storied career ending in disgrace. He vanished from the world of the military, a ghost of a bygone era. Mara, on the other hand, thrived. She officially dropped the acting from her title and became the battalion's permanent commander. She led with the same quiet confidence and unshakable integrity she had always possessed. The soldiers under her command respected her deeply. They saw her not as the woman who broke a colonel's arm, but as the leader who stood up for every soldier who had ever been silenced by fear. She showed them that true strength wasn't about shouting the loudest or hitting the hardest. It was about having the courage to do what's right, even when you're standing alone against a storm. Her story became a quiet legend at Fort Redstone, a reminder that one person, with enough courage, can indeed change everything. Thank you for watching. If you were inspired by Mara's story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more content just like this. See you next time.